Welcome to the final in-round. It is the final round, right? Yeah, final in-round.
Wait, no,
there's another one.
The second to the
Penultimate?
the penultimate round of the HWS round robin. That said, I call upon the Honourable Prime Minister to present their case. Here.
Okay, what do we think this looks like, and why do we think it fulfills the two possible ways you can consider the benefits of your life? Why we think that fear of sorrow prevents us as an individual from living a fulfilling life. Now we have a better life if we do not live on fear of sorrow. How we think this leads us to have a better understanding of what happiness is like, and how we think it would be significantly worse if we did turn this down, and how this would make our lives much, much worse than even the sorrow that we have experienced previously, and how we think this makes us actually a better person morally. So first of all, we think, given that you are 30 years old, learning benefits of sorrow, i.e. teaching you what sadness feels like, or that you shouldn't hurt animals, things like that, those things, that's basically complete. We think there's minimal learning benefits that we could achieve from experiencing sorrow later on in life. We also think, crucially, we still feel sad. Sorrow is characterized as a deep feeling in this case, and we think that we can still feel superficial sadness. It's not the case that we've lost all emotions and are an unfeeling automaton. We also still have memory, so we definitely understand that sorrow is horrible, and we know that other people can experience it, and we still feel empathy for others. And we also think that, given you're an individual, your ability to change the social expectations around sorrow are limited. We think you can have some effect, but also we think it's crucial to understand how you're going to experience the world around you and help your particular social sphere. The two possible ways you can consider the benefits of your life. First of all, if you consider your life utilitarianly, as in you're measuring how happy you are and throughout the course of your life, and the more happy you are, the better your life has been. We think this is a huge utilitarian benefit, and that you experience comparatively more happiness compared to your periods of sorrow. And this means that the utilitarian benefit you're experiencing is that your life is significantly better. Perhaps you're more deontological. You have certain goals that you wish to fulfill, and you want to fulfill them during your life. First of all, we think when we're not dogged by sorrow, and we don't have periods where we literally can't move or we can't experience life, the times when you can't leave your house because you're so incredibly sad, like you've experienced a breakup or something like that, that's the times when we think the goals that you're attempting to fulfill just aren't able to be fulfilled because of the intense sorrow you're feeling, and you can't direct yourself to the kinds of things you might think are important. This leads me on to my first point. Why we think the fear of sorrow prevents us from experiencing a fulfilling life, especially it prevents us from committing to those that we love or committing to things that we might think are important to us. First of all, we think regret or experiences of misfortune that cause sorrow. It means that we distort how we look at our life. Regret causes us to focus overwhelmingly on things that we cannot change because they're in the past, and have us obsess and waste time over thinking about something that we never could have otherwise changed. We also think that when we experience sorrow, intense sorrow because of misfortune, it means that we put way too much emphasis on things like luck or things that we could have never possibly changed. We think it means that we don't think about our life in a way that we have agency or in a way that we can think about it. But second of all, notice how the fear of sorrow limits us, right? An inability to commit to others, experienced intensely by some people, but by most people to at least some limited degree, comes from the fact that we are afraid of what might happen, afraid of what we will feel if this person rejects us, no thank you, if this person is hurt, if this person dies. The fact that we are afraid of that sorrow, and therefore deny ourselves our own happiness, and deny the happiness of another person because we're afraid of that sorrow, means that we have a less fulfilling life, and also notice crucially that the people around us have a less fulfilling life. The fact that you aren't able to fully commit to your partner, that you never can fully express your love to them because you're worried about, because you fear the sorrow that would come if they rejected you or did not fully meet your love, means that you are never a good partner to them, means that they have a less fulfilling life, and you also never fully experience the love they could have otherwise given to you. But I also think that if you do not experience sorrow, we think the fact that you're 30 years old, you're probably considering settling down. You're probably considering having a family, right? I think you will love your children much more and be more fully able to be their parent, when you're not afraid of what will happen to them. You're afraid of what will happen to them, but you're not afraid of how you will feel if something does happen to them. We think that love is more returned, and we think that love is returned when you're able to fully commit, and that comes from not being afraid of the sorrow that would come from it. We think turning that down makes us a better person, makes the people around us have better lives, and makes our life significantly better. Go ahead.
Only when you feel really bad after a breakup are you likely to not want to be terrible to your next partner. What incentive do you have on your side to become more moral as time goes on?
Well, so first of all, we think the fact that you might have treated your partner badly is only one possible example, and there are instances where you break up with someone just because you don't work together, and that still makes you incredibly sad. But second of all, we think your incentive to be a better person often does come from the love that you feel for that person. It isn't about the sorrow, it's about trying to be a better person for them. We think sorrow is a uniquely bad motivator because it takes so much time away and focuses on things like regret and misfortune, things that you can't change. Also notice that when we weigh up our happiness in comparison to sadness or relative to other emotions, we don't gain the full benefit of that happiness, and means that we're likely to overvalue small happinesses in comparison to large sadness, right? This is the thing that a small happiness after a long period of sorrow might feel overwhelmingly beneficial to you. But notice that this leads you to overvalue small or short-term happinesses in compared to long-term sorrows. This is things like the fact that if we've had a bad day, we eat a candy bar, and that makes us feel a lot better. But that's a short-term happiness that doesn't fulfill us, doesn't give us the same kind of happiness, and means that we're actually not experiencing the true value of that happiness because we've experienced such intense sadness. We think that sadness takes away from us being able to understand what true happiness is and being able to pursue our long-term happinesses, because perhaps, in this example, would be much more happier if we didn't eat the candy bar and looked after ourselves in the long term and didn't have a coronary, right? But notice that the fact that because intense sadness leads us to overvalue short-term happiness, this is what leads to things like substance abuse, or even leads us being less able to fulfill our long-term goals because we seek our short-term goals in comparison to that long-term sadness. Mubarak?
So if a sad event occurs to you, what does this person feel if they can't feel sorrow?
Okay, well, we think they feel some sadness. They feel the same kind of superficial sadness you feel when something bad happens to you, but you don't feel long-term regret. You don't feel long-term intense sadness. It's not the kind of thing where it's going to immobilize you or make it difficult for you to live your life. We think that's what you feel. We think sorrow also feels worse when you know you could have turned it down. Notice that if we turn this down, on opposition side, long-term, every single instance of sorrow feels so much worse. We experience the regret of not having turned it down. In that middle of that sadness, we wish we could have turned that sorrow down. We wish we could not experience. We wish we could not have experienced it. So that means if opposition does choose to turn it down, they condemn this individual to a lifetime of more intense sorrow. Not just the sorrow we've already experienced, but one that is significantly worse. But notice that because you do not feel sorrow, and you know how much happier your life is, other people's sorrow seems like such a crime. They could be so much happier if they did not have to experience this. You want to reduce other people's sorrows because you have felt it, you understand how terrible it is, but you have been given the gift of a much happier life without it. First of all, we think you're better able to empathize, but we think you're less afraid of being overwhelmed by other people's sorrow. We think you're much more able to have time and space for those in your life who truly do feel sorrow. Because under the status quo, we think you don't do things like think about how terrible the world is, or listen to the bad day your friend is having, because you're afraid of being overwhelmed by their sorrow. We think this makes you a better person and have a better life. Propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for the remarks and call upon the Leader of the Opposition.
I strongly disagree with Prime Minister when she came up here and said that there is absolutely no use to the emotion of sorrow. I think the emotion of sorrow has led to a lot of the help that we've seen in community. It has caused a lot of the bonds that I've had with friends, because as much as we would like to purely communicate based on happiness and superficial sadness, the unfortunate reality is the most bond we feel with an individual is when we realize that we've both hit rock bottom once before, and you know what that's like, and you know what it feels like to be in my shoes. In my speech, I'm going to answer the question of why we think that sorrow is a necessary emotion based on 3 things. Number 1, why we think that this helps an individual make informed choices. Number 2, how we help the community around you based on sympathy and empathy. And thirdly, why we think sorrow is necessary to feel maximum happiness. All of my rebuttals are integrated. So firstly, why we think that sorrow is important in order for an individual to make an informed choice. Because notice the way that Prime Minister talked about the emotion of sorrow and saying that we would refrain from making certain decisions was as if the alternative of making that decision would have been an absolute good. I don't think that that's the scenario, right? Sometimes I think that considering the fact that the individual we're talking about is not a person with mental health, depression, and anxiety, but the average 30-year-old that feels sorrow from time to time and is able to come out of it, we think that that sorrow is needed in order for that person to have complete set of emotions to make an informed choice. Informed choice is not just about logic and information per se, but how you feel upon the actions made with that provided logic and information. I think sorrow does several things, right? Like it motivates you to do well because you don't want to fail, because you fear the disappointment from you and from others, right? I think that this also pushes individuals to make much more calculated, responsible decisions as opposed to being reckless and think like YOLO, let's just do whatever that makes me feel in that feel happy in that instance. But secondly, I think it also causes individuals to prevent themselves from repeating past mistakes, because you know what it felt like to feel the misfortune and the heartbreak of the initial decision that you made, that perhaps not changing your ways could lead you towards making that same mistake that causes you to feel that sorrow. Essentially, we think that sorrow guides you to a choice that makes you actually much more happier along the way, because you know what are the choices that do not make you happy. As a result, you are better able to make that choice that would eventually make you happy. But the second reason as to why we think that this helps communities around you, that it helps you to help the community around you based on sympathy and empathy, is because sorrow is a very strong emotion. It's impactful, and unfortunately or fortunately, it is haunting, right? But the thing about it being haunting is that it's ingrained in your memory, and you relive that memory in a way that you make sure you don't want other individuals to feel that as well. This means that a lot of the times you're more likely to go out of your way and feel that you have a moral and social obligation to help those who are suffering around you. Obviously, the next question is then, why is suffering a better metric to help others as opposed to happiness? The reason why we think happiness is an insufficient emotion for individuals to help others is because, firstly, we don't think that happiness is ingrained in the memory of individuals the same way that sorrow does, the exact same way as how Prime Minister characterized it to you. But secondly, I think suffering and sorrow allows you to decide who to help based on that urgency, because who suffers most and feels that sorrow most in a much more intense manner. No, thank you. But thirdly, look, whether we want to admit it or not, human beings are selfish, right? I think the incentive is much less when individuals say, hey, I want to help that person so that that person feels happier than I am. A lot of the times, we are unfortunately, we don't think along the lines of, I want every other person to be happier than I am, or want to be happy like me. A lot of the times, we want to be the most happy person in that circle because we think that being happy is fulfilling. But the problem with that is that you don't want to help others if the metric is only happiness, but if the metric is also sorrow on you because you don't want other people to feel to hit rock bottom, you're more likely to go out of your way to help that individual. So your empathy in your world is minimal because A, although you have that memory is incomplete because you don't know what it's like to feel the occurrence because of that memory. But secondly, so your memory is incomplete. Any questions?
Yep.
Yeah.
So you tell us that you need sorrow to exist as a metric so you can decide who best to help based on who is more sorrowful. Why does that require you to feel the sorrow as opposed to just understanding who is worse off?
No, because you want to relate, right? Because a lot of the times we're driven by that selfish inclination that I know what that person is feeling, therefore I'm going to go out of my way because I know that if I was in that situation, I would also feel equally sorrowful, therefore I don't want that person to be that way. But the second thing, right, is that sorrow is important to build connections with others. Other people around you, even in this world, even in your model, still feel sorrow. The only difference is you don't. That means that it's a lot difficult for you to be able to communicate and relate to others. Fine, you will be alone. Maybe you won't feel the sadness, the deep sadness of feeling alone. But I can hell bet you're not going to feel happy either. Because you're not building that bond based on the individuals, because the sort of bond that you are now building with individuals are incomplete. She talks about partners and how now individuals can't relate to their partners. Part of the reason why partners and relationships and your ties with families become so strong and you evolve and grow together is because you know what it was like to go through the thick and thin together, and that it wasn't just a one-way street of one person facing that sorrow and the other person not like either feeling that I can't relate to you. Part of the reason why we confide in certain individuals was because we felt that they could relate, that they would understand, and they would give me advice based on the perspective of knowing how it felt like to feel this sorrow. That's what builds friendships and allow individuals to evolve and for you to have a much more fulfilling relationship as opposed to a one-way street of one person feeling sorrow and the other person saying, I kind of want to help you, but I feel limited to the extent of which I can reach out to you. That's the problem that occurs in your world. Closing.
Yeah, so you just made the argument that it's only you that won't feel sorrow as opposed to other people. But if that's the case, then communities and bonds can still exist. It's just a question of why should you accept unnecessary harm and pain onto yourself?
That's horrible, right? That means the rest of society is bonding and building a community of their own, and one of which you can't relate to because you feel like you just don't understand the emotions that they're going through. The most that you have is an academic understanding of this emotion of sorrow, but I just can't seem to opt in and realize what sorrow actually feels like. But the third thing, we think sorrow is necessary to feel maximum happiness. Part of the reason why you feel amplified happiness is because you know that you went through sorrow in order to get to that accomplishment, right? That's part of the reason why individuals, sometimes when they get it easy immediately and win things at a very initial stage of debating, they don't feel as fulfilling as the rest of us. I'm sorry, I don't know why this is like something so personal. But like, it's like, it just doesn't feel as impactful as an individual who had gone through years of hardship and heartbreak and mistakes that they had gone through to learn the ways to accomplish, right? As opposed to a person that got it easy, feels some form of happiness, but it's also attached to some form of emptiness. But the question that we've always had for government was that in a world where you were going through hardships, what would you eventually feel? Because superficial sadness definitely doesn't teach you the sort of lessons that would require you to become a better person and a much happier person in future. For these reasons, proud to oppose.
Oh, right, so thank you. I think we have the opposition for their remarks. Call upon the Deputy Prime Minister.
Okay. I think the case from side opposition largely boils down to this. There are net utilitarian benefits of you towards feeling some sorrow. On balance, it allows you to live a better, richer, more fulfilling life upon which you'll be ultimately happier. Obviously, we're going to contest all this. We're not conceding this. But I think even if this were true, this only deals with one of the possible metrics upon which an individual can decide what is good for them. I think the fear of failure, the fear of feeling sad, which takes you away from doing other things, even if you're winning on a net utilitarian benefit, I don't think humans are just utilitarian matching machines. I think we have other deontological goals insofar as there are certain things we might want to do with our life, certain ends we might want to achieve. And if you're afraid of feeling sad, if you're afraid of feeling lost or regretful, you are less likely and less able to do this. We've heard no response and no engagement on that facet of it entirely. I'm going to do two things in this speech. I'm going to do some framing in terms of who we think you are and what we think actually turning this down does. I'm going to talk secondly about depression and suicide, where that comes from, how this plays into it. First of all, extensive rebuttal to the claims that we just heard. So, first of all, we're told that you need to feel sorrow in order to be able to do well, because you need to be able to fear things like social disapproval or the fear of failure in order to instigate you to try at all. I point out you're still able to feel all of these things. Like the difference between a deep sadness and just feeling sad or feeling something a bit bad has happened is the extent of the emotional reaction. You can still recognize when a slightly bad thing happens to you that is bad, and you would have preferred to take in actions for that not to occur. What doesn't happen is, and the risk you run on their side, is the risk of shutdown. Is the risk that essentially, if you feel too sad, then essentially your brain you need to stop feeling emotions at all. You harden yourself. You make yourself more resistant to feeling things. If the sorrow becomes too much overwhelming, you become less able to feel even the good happinesses or any sort of positive emotion when it comes. But my question is, I'm not clear why this extra degree of loss to you, or this extra degree, is necessary in order to motivate you to do things, as opposed to simply the knowledge that it was bad and the ability to feel like happiness, and that on balance your life would have been better. Secondly, we're told that you're likely to be more careful and less reckless in making your decisions. But again, I point out this doesn't work, because sorrow is always backwards looking in this regard. Like, we take risks on the basis that the bad thing is not going to happen to us. Like, we all assume when we're going into a debate that we're going to win, and that there are things we're able to do to win it. So I'm not clear why backwards looking sorrow is particularly significant in this regard. Thirdly, we're told that you won't repeat past mistakes. But I point out, as we've told you, given that you're making this decision when you're 30, you've already felt sorrow before. You've already done the bulk of the learning process and done the bulk of recovering from your bad mistakes. You've already seen at least probably one family member or close friend die. You've already had one relationship break up. I'm not clear why this needs to happen again and again in order for you to keep relearning the lesson, as it were. I think the knowledge of it happening once is sufficient in this regard. But look, even if all of this were true, all of this my question is, why is any of these things bad? Why are more reckless decisions, not trying hard, and repetition of your past mistakes bad? Presumably it's bad because it makes your life worse, because it makes you less happy, because it makes you feel less bad. But we're getting past all of that on our side of the house anyway, at the point which you're just not able to feel all of the harms that come from the scenarios they give. So we think first of all we disagree that you get to that worst stage in your life. But secondly, even if you do, we just don't think it's as bad if you're not able to feel this deep sadness, this deep sorrow. Secondly, is the question on empathy in human relationships. Okay, the first thing I point out here is again as a point of frame. Even if we concede the entirety of this, human relationships are simply one facet of our life. There are plenty of people who go through life and live perfectly happy and fulfilling lives, having only a very small, close-knit group of friends, being largely lonely, being largely introverted, or living on their own. This isn't typical of all human experiences, and even if your human relationships aren't great, there are plenty of other sources you can find joy in life from, such as career, such as pursuing happiness, doing your hobbies, whatever it is you might want to do. So that's even if you buy this. However, I don't think this works for a number of reasons. So, first of all, we're told that because humans are selfish, we will intrinsically close off from people and not open ourselves up to others. So we're less able to empathize and we don't develop relationships or help others that way. I point out, look though, if it were true, if we buy this characterization that humans are fundamentally selfish, my question is, why do we allow ourselves to feel that empathy at all? I think if you're truly selfish, you don't allow yourself to feel the same sadness or feel the same empathy as your friend. Like I'm sure we've all done this at least once. We're just too busy to have time for our friends' problems, or you blow off someone who might be having a bad decision. If humans are truly selfish, I think we'd fundamentally do that far, far more often. But look, their analysis doesn't even work, because the reason Amira gives as to why it is necessary as to why the feeling of sorrow is necessary to allow this empathy to take place, is you thinking, if I was in that situation, I would feel equally sorrowful. Notice this is not a selfish motivation. That's specifically an empathetic one, and if it's true that humans are capable of being empathetic like this, I don't know why it's necessary for sorrow to be the instigator for that empathy, or ongoing sorrow, given the point at which you felt it even once in your life. I don't know why we can't empathize on the basis of shared happiness or shared community. We just get the assertion that it's sorrow that's the most important thing, that's the knowledge that hits rock bottom. I've no idea why it is that that's true. We're then told you're less able to cooperate and come together in relationships because you're not able to feel sorrow together on the same basis. I would point out, first of all, that's still true on our side of the house, given that when I'm comforting someone whose dad has died, my dad has never died. I don't know what that sorrow feels like. I'm still not able to, even though I know what feeling sad being feels like. That's clearly, if that is a barrier to empathy, that's a barrier on both sides of the house. But I just don't think it is true, because I don't think that sorrow is the only basis upon which you can comment on this. Amira.
Given that this person has lived 30 years with sorrow as a typical person, isn't depressed and is able to cope, why can't this person have complete set of emotions to make adult decisions that are often rarely black or white and need complete set of emotions?
Okay, I'm going to come on to that, but the typical person will be depressed or has been depressed at some point in their life, and that's about 2/3 of people. Regardless, and I think none of this even answers Bethany's first point of you're just less likely to go into the relationship in the first place, at the point at which you're more afraid of feeling that sorrow, more afraid of feeling that risk of failure. So the relationship is important. Even if the relationship doesn't function quite as well, we'd rather you're going into it in the first place. Closing.
Alright, your grand cop-out can't be that people will still remember sorrow. Surely, if they're never going to experience it again, it's not going to inform their actions in the same way.
No. Obviously that's mitigation, that's why it's a debate, right? But we still think this is sufficient preemption, this is sufficient motivation that I don't know why continually feeling it again is absolutely necessary, which is what I think you need to prove in order for any of this to work. So, in terms of depression, which we're going to talk about here, look, one of the most damaging myths around mental health and depression is the myth that always depression comes from nowhere like a bolt from the blue. Obviously it can do quite a lot, it can do for some people, but for a lot of people it doesn't. For a lot of people it comes in response to sorrow. It comes in response to seeing a loved one die. It comes in response to a relationship failing or losing your job or whatever. So this is a few things. First of all, it intensifies all the other bad feelings you feel, and that if you're already sorrowful, if you're already in a bad place, you feel every knock much, much worse when it comes. Secondly, it makes you numb to the good benefits, because if you're sorrow or if you're sad as a result of a family member dying or a relationship failing, even if a good thing happens to you, that good thing doesn't feel as good, precisely because it's always coloured by the sadness, by the sorrow. The impacts of this are colossal. It's a massive loss of quality on your quality of life. You're far more likely to self-harm, commit suicide, or engage in destructive behaviours. You're far more likely to do things like drink alcohol, like take drugs, which poor people disproportionately do, precisely because it's a temporary escape from sorrow. When you're sad, when you're sorrowful, when you're in deep sadness, you're more likely to do this. It's worse than your quality of life, it's worse than the life of those around you. For all these reasons, propose.
I'd like to thank each member for their remarks and call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
I think a bit of clarity needs to be added. opening government can't get away saying that we'll just have little bits of sorrow that necessarily mean we make all the correct decisions, and what OP has to defend is like humongous amounts of sorrow that we can't get over. No, this debate has to be government defending absence of sorrow and deciding what the the absence of sorrow, what emotions exist, and why is that emotion better off in terms of your decision-making calculuses. You would submit that in the absence of sorrow, i.e. you can't feel sad when something sad happens to you, you would be probably numb. You probably feel empty. You feel a lack of emotions. And we would argue this eventually makes you worse off. Two things I want to talk about today. First, I'll talk about how this impacts the individual in question. Second, how this impacts your ability to be a moral being. So first, how does this impact the person in question? Understand that this is not just a typical person, but also a typical healthy person. So I think like the emotion already assumes that this person is not suffering from issues of mental depression. But even if they were suffering at certain points in their lives, this person has been perfectly capable of getting out of those episodes and has not crippled them in any significant manner for them to become unhealthy at any point in their lives. And sure, some people become unhealthy post 30, but I think the statistical probability of this person suffering from crippling depression later on in life is abysmally low, especially when they don't seem to have a history of it currently. A few things. First, so I think this issue of depression, however, we would posit is actually might be even more likely in a world where you're not likely to be able to feel any emotions, where you feel empty, you feel numb. I actually think that is a world where you might actually feel more purposeless because you don't understand what you're supposed to do at that particular point in time. That is a world because a lot of depressed people are not just sad, but they're just empty. They don't feel any emotions sometimes, and that leaves them feeling like they don't have a purpose here. And I think as someone who has been able to deal with sorrow, it's an incredibly risky decision for you to want to deal with numbness or the absence of sadness in a particular situation. I think, if anything, depression might actually be more likely there. But even if you don't buy that, here are a few things why this is better off. A, they say happiness is short-term. So the question is, how do you maximize your happiness if it's short-term inherently? I think the way to do it is to have episodes of sorrow in which that means you value that happiness to a large degree. And I just don't buy that soreness or like past instance of soreness means I can't laugh at a joke, I can't feel happy right now, I can't feel like I won, right? But also, I think what's more important is the fact that you avoided sorrow in itself often means people feel happy at a particular point in time. So sometimes I just feel like I won a debate competition and I didn't lose, and that's great. And I think that also contributes to net amount of happiness that you can get out of it. So their response was, look, in a lot of instances, risk avoidance gets us bad outcomes. So for example, jumping into relationships. So I think this is largely I think Mayor already responded by talking about how in a lot of other instances, you also don't want to make decisions that you regret because risk avoidance can be a net benefit in a lot of other instances. So how do we break this particular deadlock? I think the point at which we are looking at an individual who, so I think the question is whether or not some levels of soreness is needed, right? So we would admit that probably humongous amounts of soreness might mean to too much risk avoidance, or absence of sorrow would mean too much risk taking. So the question is, if this person has a net amount of soreness that allows them to be healthy in their life, why shouldn't we go ahead and take that? I think that allows them to take optimum decision makings in that particular point in time. Sure.
Okay, this is an atrocious burden shift. You're stopping from feeling sorrow. You still feel joy, empathy, anger, envy, pity, greed, ecstasy, the whole pantheon of human emotions. You're losing one bit. It is ridiculous to say this will turn you into an unfeeling automaton.
Okay, so I agree you will feel all of those other bits. The question is what you feel when something sad happens to you, i.e. right after a breakup, right? I don't think you can feel happy and joyous right after a breakup, even in a world where you don't feel sorrowness, right? So I think a feeling of numbness is comparatively worse. But I think I've argued why even if you don't buy that, we'd still win this debate. Moving on, I think the next thing that we talked about is how social connections get you more happiness on a net. Before I explain this, sure.
Yeah, so people who are likelier to experience loss, suffering, etc. are probably people who are disadvantaged in some way, whether because of their wealth or their race. Why should those people have the double burden of both that oppression and then the experience of sorrow?
So, because your life is objectively better with sorrow, because you can also attain more levels of happiness. But if but also I just don't think this person is like necessarily an oppressed minority. It's a typical healthy person, right? Most probably is a Chinese majority person, like statistically speaking. Just next, in terms of like social connections, in terms of what happens over there. First, so OG says no, social connections are not important for a lot of people. I just think it's wrong because I think the vast majority of people are social animals who gain a lot of happiness from being able to form social connections. But B, even if you're talking about people who prioritize corporate life or individual achievements, these are also people who form connections with others in their corporate life, for example, in their jobs, etc. So how do we think this occurs best on our side? And even if you're talking about people who are introverted and only have small set of people who they form connections with, it's important for them to feel deep connections with those individuals. And I just don't think that happens under their world. They said, oh, you have a memory, so you know how you felt. Actually, you don't, because this is how memories work. You remember something that happened in the past, and then you remember how you felt about it by triggering a feeling that happens currently. Once you remember past incident, an emotion springs in you. In their world, that emotion no longer springs in you when you remember a particular incident. So you're literally going to remember your dad dying without feeling any sorrow at this particular point in time. I don't think that this person has the ability to socially connect with other individuals. Insofar as they claim you can be superficial about it and lie about it, I don't think you get the net amount of actual social bonding as a result of it. I don't think you feel it. B, fake people get called out all the time and people sooner or later realize you don't actually feel the way they want you to feel. And I think that necessarily leaves these people worse off. But ultimately, even if you don't buy all of that, we think that human beings have a net obligation to be a moral being towards others, because the point at which you are given rights is so you can reciprocate that moral rights given to you. So the point at which you can't do that, we think that's bad. Look, it's not just about feeling sadness and relatability like OG posited. The emotion, if you look at the wording of the info slide, it literally means you can't even regret the fact that someone else went through a misfortune. If you can't even regret the fact that someone else went through misfortune, I highly doubt you have the energy to make sacrifices to actually correct the position that person is in. Because you just don't believe in regretting what happened to them. So you don't have any obligation to actually benefit other people around you. And the point at which you don't, you're literally a very, very immoral being who has no ability to empathize, not just empathize, but even regret the fact that other people suffer. And I just don't think that's a moral state of being to be. Particularly when human beings are created by social bondings and created as a result of us giving you rights because we expect that moral reciprocity to come from you.
Here, here.
I think the Deputy Leader of Opposition will call upon the Member of Government to open up the back half of the debate. Here, here.
The debate we've seen so far is effectively a series of probably inadjudicable assertions about the way emotions work from various people. You know, I process breakups like different to how Danny processes breakups. I imagine that's true for most people in this room. Trying to universalize exactly how experiences like did that happen is probably not particularly helpful in this debate. So Danny and I are going to bypass that and move past that. Two things in this extension. Firstly, I want to talk about who actually systemically feels sorrow at the most consistent and systemic structural level, how they're affected as marginalised groups in society, and why they are in fact typical, contrary to what we hear from the opposition. Secondly, we want to provide a genuine philosophical grounding for this, irrespective of utilitarian outcomes or things like that, for a human duty that precedes all others, why one has an obligation to do this on philosophical grounds. Rebuttal is mostly integrated, and a little bit of engagement with the assertions on emotions will come afterwards. Cool, so firstly, who feels the most in systemic sorrow? They say they aren't the reasonably, coded as white heteronormative groups we've been hearing so far about in this debate. Rather, they're African Americans who have to grapple with the fact they live in a society that systemically disadvantages them. It's the poor who know they live in a society where it's impossible for them to climb up the rungs of the socioeconomic ladder. Look, they're going to claim these people aren't typical. That's just nonsense, right? Typicality necessarily encompasses a range. Typicality necessarily encompasses a variety of different experiences. I, as a white man, am not the only instantiation of what is typical in the world, as much as sometimes I'd like to think so. Beyond just that, if you literally just want to take a global average, your global average is going to be pretty fucking poor. Your global average is probably going to be of a race that is marginalised to a pretty substantial extent in a lot of contexts. Insofar as you're doing that, you're necessarily going to have to grapple with the fact that being typical means a lot of the situations we're talking about, this really, really matters in this debate. Why is this true? This is true both on an individual level and on a collective level. So let's chat about the individual level first of all. There's two important things to note here about why the sorrow that these groups experience is absolutely different to the sorrow we've been discussing so far on this debate. No thank you. The first reason is it's not transitory necessarily in the way that we hear from the opening half. That is to say, it's not what you feel for 30 days after a breakup, rather it's an ongoing and deeply awful state of emotion that you continue to feel. That means a lot of the material we get out of OO about, needing sorrow so that later you can attain some kind of happiness simply doesn't work for this group. Beyond that though, insofar as sorrow is transitory and does happen, those instances of transitoriness are far more plentiful for these groups, and therefore the impacts of those are magnified. What does this mean on a real level, in fact? Because sorrow individually within people's minds is debilitating in ways that are unimaginable. We've already heard some of this in this debate. Sorrow is linked to things like not being able to try yourself out for opportunities, not being able to, put yourself out there, try to get jobs. J.K. Rowling literally compared depression to having your soul sucked out by a dementor. That's the kind of awfulness we're talking about. On a kind of more physical level, people often try to escape with things like drug addiction. That's why we're seeing things like huge opioid crisis among white populations in the Midwest, who are probably around the average income of America, which is unfortunately reasonably rather poor. What this means, thank you, is marginalised people in a world where they are able to escape sorrow, i.e. our world, are far more able to escape the double burden of not only oppression in the outside world, but oppression that reproduces itself in an even worse way inside your own mind. We get them out of that double burden, find the meaningful ways to improve their lives. What they can therefore do, thank you, is put aside that internalised dislike and move towards some kind of focus on their self-interest that allows them to advance their interests in a far more meaningful way, which is ultimately, both sides in this debate have agreed, a really important good. So we bypass the emotional, who knows whatery of this debate and get to a real impact right from the gate. No thanks. Secondly though, this happens on a communal level as well, because if you're wanting to talk about individual choice that individual people make, you have to be willing to universalise this to a certain degree, accept that people, to a certain degree, if they're reasonably similar, would want to do this on a widespread way. We say any kind of social movement, for any kind of advancement that is premised on sorrow as an emotion, i.e. for the groups that we were talking about previously, is far more likely to be damaging to its own members and unlikely to be effective than one that's not based on sorrow as an emotion. Firstly, on its own members. The reason for that is if you base your movement on sorrow, then political outcomes, which are very hard to predict, often won't go the way you want, are very closely tied to your mental health. No, thank you. That is to say that if you don't get some kind of economic reform that improves the situation for your structurally disadvantaged group, again, note that most typical people are structurally disadvantaged in our society, then you're likely to feel a far greater degree of sorrow than if it wasn't necessarily tied to that kind of advancement. And even for your goals more generally, the kinds of arguments you make when they're premised on sorrow are arguments that are very difficult to understand for people who haven't understood those feelings, and therefore far less likely to be persuasive to those who are in situations of systemic advancement. It's also very difficult to make political trade-offs, to say I'm willing to trade off this particular interest for another when sorrow is the foundation of it. I'll take closer.
Look, if you want to be convenient and make this about poor, vulnerable people, even in that case, you don't really improve their life. So they still randomly get shot on the road, except people around them just don't feel bad about that anymore.
Yeah, so Danny and I tell you about the double burden of oppression. Danny and I tell you that a huge component of oppression absolutely is the external thing, but a potentially even more damning component of oppression is the way it reciprocates within your own life, the way it makes you feel awful and damned and without any kind of future. As soon as that happens, that's the point at which people find it even harder to escape, and that's what Danny and I bring them. Secondly, totally independent philosophical justification. OG gives you a lot of reasonably vague good things that can emerge from sadness. Danny and I are going to tell you why it's a necessary function of your humanity to make this choice. Why this therefore this duty precedes every other argument of this debate, and if you believe us, we have to win this debate. No thanks. Why is this true? You have an obligation to your own freedom to maximise your own freedom. Firstly, sorrow undermines your freedom. Why? You're unable to rationally weigh different outcomes insofar as they're always clouded by the depths of sorrow, pushing you into some kind of irrationality. This is all the info slide in terms of just how awful it makes you feel. Insofar as the value of our humanity, therefore, is our freedom, we necessarily want to have to maximise this. Pretty easy illustration for why this is. I want to brush my teeth because I want hygiene. I want hygiene because I want to smell nice. I want to smell nice because I want people to love me. The key here is always the I want there, which is necessarily individual autonomy wanting to maximise one's own freedom. But before I continue, I'll take opening.
Your argument about obligation to freedom is contingent on my OG's material that this actually gives you freedom, and the rest of your material doesn't talk about the spectrum of people, but only a subset of them.
Okay, cool. So I've already dealt with why we actually talk about a far wider spectrum than the privileged spectrum you guys talk about. In terms of this, no, it's not contingent on OG's freedom. We tell you that independent of how individual emotional vagaries work, sorrow necessarily results in irrationality at the point where it clouds you from making rational choices. That's independent of how one processes breakups or everything we get from the other side. So given that, therefore, one must necessarily choose to maximise one's own freedom in order to act on one's own freedom. Constraining one's own freedom by choice is necessarily contradictory. So given this philosophical backing, necessarily you have to back our side. Necessarily the only way to fulfil one's duties as a rational human being is to choose to remove sorrow and maximise one's freedom. Very quickly, a few extraneous assertions about emotion from the opening half. we heard that we're less likely to get empathy because empathy is premised on sorrow. Look, the people you empathize for are necessarily the people you look like. Empathy is like very much like racially and often classified. At the point at which you have a rational ability to weigh up the world, and things like altruism presumably still exist, we say actually it's going to be a lot better on our side of the house. They tell us happiness requires highs and lows. That's nonsense. Everyone from modern neuroscientists to Epicurus have agreed that happiness at its best is a consistent state of well-being. That's absolutely what we get on our side of the house. Look, Danny and I have given you the only real way to get to a genuine conclusion in this debate, and for that reason, we have to win.
I thank the member of government for their remarks and call upon the member of opposition.
I think what this debate has lacked so far is a metric. So opening government says that they want people to have more utility, closing government says they want people to have more freedom. I think broadly, what is agreed in this debate is that you want people to have more experiences. So opening government tells you that there's a fear of sorrow, which means people are not able to have as many experiences as they would have. Closing government tells you that depression means you can't go out, which means people can't have as many experiences as they could have. Opening opposition tells you that you need community bonding because that leads to more experience. So broadly, this debate is about how individuals can have most experiences in their lives and how and why those experiences are valuable. That being said, from closing opposition, we're going to talk to you about how you can meaningfully achieve a lot of things post the age of 30 and why sorrow is an integral part of the motivation to individuals to achieve more and motivation of individuals to try different kinds of experiences in their own life. We would posit to you that in the absence of sorrow, people would live a life stuck, reliving the same experiences that they've been living so far, and that's a world where people can access the least kinds of experiences. Opening opposition tells you that sorrow is a gateway to other emotions, and we agree. They say that sorrow helps you build communities and have more experiences with respect to other individuals and being able to help and have empathy for other individuals. From closing opposition, we would like to extend on the fact that sorrow is an essential part of the motivation to better your own life, right? The first thing on this is that government bench has assumed that failure is always bad. We would say that failure is in often a lot of circumstances extremely useful to you as an individual. So let's say you are a person living in a job that you're not necessarily happy with, but not necessarily sad with. That's the realistic conception of the average 30-year-old, right? You're stuck in a job where you're not completely happy, but you're not completely sad. In their world, in the absence of, for a person who's stuck in that job and wants to move out of the job, they're unable to feel the sorrow required for them to feel that that job is inadequate for their own lives. Which means that they would live in a world that people who would have probably liked to have another job or another way of living their lives, still continue in a job that doesn't give them happiness, but because you can't feel deep sorrow doesn't make them sad, which means they live in a mundane job for the rest of their lives. We would say in a world where this job is so stifling, which is true for a lot of middle-aged individuals, deep sorrow of the fact that you're stuck in that job, deep sorrow of the fact that you want a different kind of work life, that you don't want to work for a bank that makes money off looting poor people, that you don't want to work for a big corporation that clamors on the rights of other individuals, but you want to work for something else. You want to start your own startup, you want to work for an NGO. That's the kind of motivation that only comes about when you feel a deep amount of sorrow for your own life and the state your own life is in. In their world, these individuals having these midlife crises would continue to live in a perpetual state of working in the same job, doing the same routine things over and over. We allow them the ability to have new access to new experiences. For example, a lot of people actually do end up leaving corporate jobs and doing startups at the age after 30. The reason they do that, even if they earn less money, is they feel they have some control over their own business. They have some control over their own life experiences compared to corporate job, which they often take to start an individual life. We think in the absence of sorrow, they wouldn't have the ability to leave that particular job and access this kind of startup or this new experience because of the fact that they don't feel sorrow about the state of their own lives as the way it existed. We are the team that actually allows these individuals to have those kinds of experiences. Now, why are those kinds of choices and experiences important in this debate? The first reason those choices and experiences are important in this debate is that you, on side government, go through life never knowing what you like and the way you want to live your life. Which means that in their world, people continue to do what they were doing at the age of from 25 to 30 and never experience different ways they could have lived their lives. We allow individuals to actually have maximum freedom on our side of the house. They can actually have the ability to try different experiences as opposed to the government side. That's why we take that clash. Before I move on, I'll take over.
Okay, I really don't think it is sorrow that motivates startups, but look, given that most people aren't able to be entrepreneurs, surely it's better that they're not absolutely miserable when they are eventually working a job to feed their families, given that new experiences are probably only good experiences insofar as they benefit you in some way.
Yeah. Here's the thing, they want to again define sorrow in that POI. Oh, midlife crisis is not sorrow, right? You're stuck in a job, that's not sorrow. We think the most important reason that people actually try new experiences in after the age of 30 is because they deeply feel sorrowful about their own life and their own current experiences, right? Which is why you need that sorrow for them to be able to try out different things when there's a cost involved, because that sorrow is what they weigh that cost up against, right? In the absence of that weighing mechanism, they'll often continue to do what they're doing because they never weigh that up against the sorrow they feel at their current state of existence. The second thing to say on new experiences is that often this means that when you feel a deep amount of sorrow for your own life is you work harder for your own family and your own children. How does that work? One, it means that you have a motivation to give a better life for your own children. When you have a deep amount of sorrow of your own state and the fact that you weren't able to access the job you wanted, if you want to be a scientist and you're stuck, if you want to be an artist and you're stuck doing science, you have more of a motivation when you feel really sorrowful about that to let your child have maximum freedom and maximum choices to live their own lives in the best way possible. Sorrow is an essential part of parents allowing their children to live, to have more choices and working hard for the sake of their children. Before I move on, I'll take a point.
Sure. So economic disadvantage and discrimination are hard enough to surmount as it is. Why should your typical person trying to get around those have to deal with the double burden of internalized barriers as well as the external ones that are going to inflict them on either side of the house?
If the motion was people should have access to a drug that removes sorrow, closing government is relevant in this debate. The point is that the motion is about the average person who isn't this most vulnerable minority that you're talking about. So you have to debate from the point of view of an average person working an average job having a midlife crisis, because that's what this motion says, as opposed to the most vulnerable stakeholder which you want to conveniently pick on your side of the house. The last thing to say on sorrow is an extension on what opening opposition said. We think often individuals at the age of 30 are stuck in relationships, right? This is different from opening opposition where they say that sorrow is a means to bond with other people. We think your ability to get out of relationships you're stuck in is also contingent deeply on sorrow, which means that if you really feel bad about being stuck in a relationship with an individual who doesn't make you happy, only when you feel really sorrowful about that can you actually break that relationship and meet other individuals who might make you happier in the future, right? In the absence of sorrow, you're much more likely to continue in a relationship that doesn't make you really happy, but you can't feel sorrow, so you can't do anything about that. We are the ones who actually make you meet new people and have more experiences on our side of the house, which means even if it's the metric of utility or the metric of more freedoms and experiences, closing opposition takes this debate. The last thing to say in this is that closing government is not relevant because they said that this was about vulnerable people. We are the only team that actually focused on who this debate actually affects, which is people stuck in average jobs, living a midlife, routine existence, and how they can better their lives. We win this debate.
I thank the member of the opposition for their remarks and call upon the government whip here. Ooh.
In the opposition world, it seems that there's the assumption that the only emotion people can ever experience or the only thing that can guide human interaction is sorrow. We say there are many things, including love, that lots of people have this. So on our side of the house, we celebrate that and say we don't get enough of that. On their side of the house, they just assume everyone's a vampire and a bloodsucker. three things in this speech. The first thing is dealing with closing opposition's extension about life experiences. Secondly, telling you what we brought you, which is uniquely an ability to adjudicate the debate. And lastly, refutation of opening opposition. So, starting on closing opposition, they say that you need more life experiences, and that's the thing that every team assumes is valuable. Three responses. One, sorrow is often connected to physical limitations on your ability to pursue these new experiences. So even take their case of people experiencing a midlife crisis. That is often tied to things like depression, so you're less likely to go outside. It's tied to things like in the middle America where people are not happy with their current jobs because they're being automated, like the typical average middle-income white person in the US, the opioid epidemic, or things like suicide. So we say even if there might be on their side of the house, the best case scenario, more of a motivation to pursue greatness, if there's a physical constraint on that ability, then they don't get that benefit on their side of the house. But the second thing is to say it's completely false that sorrow is the only thing that motivates people to change their lives. Even take their example of the person in the midlife crisis. That type of person who might be working in an office might be motivated by a desire to do good in the world and feel that they're not sufficiently doing good because they see things that they could be doing more for. Or if you take someone like me, vanity and social approval are also very big motivations. Maybe people want more of an income compared to their peers, or maybe they want more approval. There are many powerful forces that shape human behavior, and nowhere on the opposition bench have they proven to you why sorrow is the exclusive one. There is sort of the opening opposition material about how selfishness is what guides human interaction, but that works then very well with all the other emotions that are connected to selfishness, like social approval, vanity, a desire to do good, etc. The third thing is, even if they get this motivation, and even if people can pursue it, what happens when they fail? Because recognize, it is not as easy to just switch your job to something fulfilling, particularly when we live in a world with decreasing socioeconomic mobility because of the fact that wealth is concentrated in an elite class, and also because of the fact that once you're 30, it's harder to take off time from work to get an education where you can get a more successful job. If your sorrow is tied to your ability to improve your job, and then you fail, that means you experience even more harm when you experience that suffering, as opposed to having content with your life and getting fulfillment in other situations, meaning all of their harms become worse. Closing, since I just answered.
Even your arguments about social approval might be the reason to change the job is linked to sorrow at not being approved by society.
No, because sorrow, as defined by the info slide, and that's why they gave us an info slide, is deep loss, regret, etc. I don't think just because you were a banker working at a desk, you were feeling deep loss at something actually being harmed. And even if it is the case that sorrow is one thing that connects to social approval, there are many other things that aren't connected to loss at all, like just your desire to benefit yourself. So even that response does not beat back the refutation. Second thing, closing government. What did we bring you? Was an ability to adjudicate this debate, one, by giving it a philosophical foundation for all the random impacts floating around, and second, a context to understand what we're actually talking about. So on the philosophical framework, they just assert that all we care about is experiences. We did not say that's the case. We said, why do we care about anything? Because once you ask the question of why do you want to get a job? It's because I want money. But why do you want money? Because you want to improve your life. Why does your life have value? In all of those questions is the idea that human choice has value. But if it is the case that the only reason choices have value is because of this idea of humanity, you have to respect that humanity and that ability to make choices. We told you that you then have an obligation to elect to be more free by rejecting sorrow. Why is that the case? Not because of any state of emotional circumstance of what you do or don't do based on sorrow, which is what OG gives you, but because necessarily you cannot accurately evaluate all the options you have when you do experience sorrow. And this is in direct response to the OO material about informed choice, when one option has so much more weight because you have this feeling of loss attached to it, you don't consider all the other possibilities and choose equally between them. We say that this ability to choose equally between different experiences is necessary to be free because it makes sure that you and your rationality are setting your own ends rather than emotional features outside of your control in a bit. Second thing, though, is we introduce context. So, the first thing is, it is really funny that they're CG is too niche, and then they say, this debate is about the middle-class, midlife crisis person working at a bank, in a desk, in a job, and that's who we're going to talk about. But beyond that, one, we told you the people likeliest to experience sorrow, to get some basis for why we're making this assumption, is people who have a lot of fucked up shit that happens to them. We say that those are people who experience some form of disadvantage. And we never said it's just about minorities or just about poor people. Archie gave you a range of experiences from people in the Midwest to African Americans to people in rural poverty, and explain why in those situations you add a double burden to this experience. And to say that, oh, they're happier because now they understand what happiness is, doesn't make much sense, because they already have to deal with the fact that they lose a child from something happening to them, and now they have to deal with the lifelong feeling of regret that comes from that, when that doesn't do anything to marginally improve their lives. But the second thing is, Archie tells you it's a statistical average. If you took everyone in the world, like the average person would probably be a poor person in China. No response to that, or to any of the material that follows from that. So that's important because you get some sense of making the predictions that are happening on the opening half, which assume this abstract individual of a view from nowhere. Yes?
Sorrow is what causes you to overlook race and religion and selfishness and help others on the metric of urgency. In your best case, why would I just be insular and be a complicit towards the discrimination of others because I just can't regret the misfortune that happened to me?
Sure. I think it's actually the opposite, that the way people feel sorrow is often to those that they feel more relation to. So when you try to create bonds based on this emotional experience, it is someone like a white person feeling, oh, I know what it's like when your dad loses your job and how we suffered economically from that. So I'm going to connect more to Darren Wilson for getting fired for shooting Michael Brown rather than the person who actually experienced it. Because these empathetic and emotional connections occur, as they say, on your ability to relate to people, but you relate to people based on a whole system of other factors that often correlate along things like class, race, gender, etc. Which means on their side of the house, these deep bonds that they say are so important only occur in certain situations. But then on this argument about deep bonds from opening opposition, last thing I'm going to do in this speech. As I said to another response, there are many other bases. Like, you can have love for your partner. The reason, they never explain why this is absolutely true that you can't feel these other things, because as we know in society, there are people who don't experience sorrow, yet we say they find meaningful partnerships, meaningful marriages, etc. So there's no reason that uniquely needs to be the case. Lastly, on their argument about happiness, we say you don't need to evaluate happiness in terms of getting to the next point, because then you'll always be dissatisfied because there's something always more to achieve. We say conceptualize happiness as an independent good in and of itself. So because freedom is the basis of this round, and because we actually tell you who experiences sorrow, we're proud to propose.
I thank the government whip and call upon the output to conclude the debate. There we go.
Ultimately, the reason why we win this debate from closing opposition is because we were the team that meets government bench on their individualistic metric and tells them, even by that logic, why, like in terms of the experiences that an individual has, that sorrow is something that is going to be able to give them more access to the experiences that they want, right? Also, we are the side that introduces the lens of what a reasonable 30-year-old person looks like, perhaps. Notice that they absolutely do not respond to our characterization of the typical 30-year-old person who's stuck in a day job, which surely makes up for a large amount of people that we need to consider in this debate, even if not all of them, right? So you have to notice that the only chance that they had to respond to that, they absolutely do not respond and say that, oh, that is just not the case. We're going to be nicer, and we will also respond to their bits about like poor, vulnerable 30-year-old people and tell you why even on that we win, right? So before I talk about why closing government doesn't really have an extension and falls out of this debate, let's just clarify like this clever thing that government bench is trying to do throughout, right? They're like, oh, other emotions exist, so you can still like make decisions based on like social approval and other things like that, right? Look, insofar as that these things are strong enough for you to make like important decisions based on them, we would contend that it would be rooted in sorrow, which means that if you're going to make large decisions based on whether you feel socially approved or not, then you're quite likely to also feel very bad if you don't get that social approval. We would contend that a whole gamut of emotions in fact stems from like sorrow or something that makes you necessarily feel sad, right? Sit down. So opening wanted to be clever and be like, oh, but you still have like anger and disgust and all of those things, right? We think that the first starting point to feel anything negative, whether it be anger or disappointment or regret, is in fact sadness and sorrow. And for that meaning, like for that emotion to be like meaningful in and of itself, we we think that sorrow is something that gives us access to a large range of emotions, which means they couldn't get away with all of these things, right? Alright, closing government and why do they fall out, right? So they do two things in this debate. Firstly, they only want to talk about like poor minority people and why this is good for these like very, very vulnerable people, right? A few comments. Firstly, that's too convenient and doesn't engage with all of the other parts of the debate that opposition bench wanted to talk about. Not at all, right? Secondly, that even if that is the case, they never really tell us how is it that they're going to improve the conditions of these particular people. So presumably, if you're a black person in a ghetto, you still have random people being shot around you. It's just that in their world, like people don't feel bad about it, which means that they just like don't feel afraid that tomorrow they might be shot as well, right? We think that like on the comparative is just suboptimal decision making, and on our side of the house, we would much rather have people feel angry and outraged about it and join the Black Lives Matter movement and perhaps try to reduce the number of people sit down that are going to get shot, which is in turn going to be much better for you. Surely, even if the example is a bit extreme, you get the logic in terms of how you can in fact improve your life by joining movement. Because the assumption of that argument is that nothing can ever change if you're poor and vulnerable. That is just not the case. You just have to look at all of the historical progress that we've seen for all of the communities that they want to talk about, and the only reason that happened is because there were individuals who felt incredibly upset at the state of their being and dreamed to aspire to be something better, to be in a better and a more safer position in society. That is something that they entirely lose out on that side of the house. So that's the first bit of extension, sit. Now the second thing that they say is that it limits freedom. Firstly, notice that that's not an extension, that's exactly what opening government says, right? Because it's the same argument. How do we resolve this deadlock then, right? Because we're telling you that like people make decisions based on the fact that they're sad, and they say that it cuts you out from making decisions because you fear that you will be sad or because sadness paralyzes you. Here's how you break it. The thing about sadness is that it is temporary, right? Like, so even if you are like mind-numbingly depressed in the way in which OG wants to like be super convenient and characterize it as, we think even in that instance, people do get out of that particular depression, right? We think coping mechanisms exist, sit down in terms of like support structures, such as your families or like going to doctors and clinics if you are clinically depressed, right? However, on our side of the house, when you take away that sorrow, that is a permanent thing that is never going to change, right? Which means if you have to compare in terms of like access to emotions, they were the team that was permanently taking away a whole range of emotions, and as a result of that, a whole range of actions that could be accessed via those emotions. On the comparative, the only thing that we lose is perhaps like this small bit of sadness where people are like super paralyzed, but we think that they can get out of that, and that's how you weigh those two outcomes, right? Before I talk more about opening government, I'll take you.
Okay, so the analysis that we've given isn't contingent upon you believing that these people are necessarily poor or ethnic minorities. It applies equally to them and also to the other 3 billion people in the world. So I'm very unclear on how it is that sorrow is the root of all negative emotions. But if it is true that it is, then once you've felt sorrow for every year up until you're 30, you've learned how to feel anger and envy, and you don't stop feeling anger and envy as a result of stopping feeling sorrow.
Like you really can't expect us to think that there isn't any conceptual difference between like the concept of sorrow in the abstract as you remembered it, or the actual actually feeling it in the flesh, right? We think like in our extension, in terms of the people we talked to you about who are stuck in dead-end jobs, who are stuck in dead-end relationships, are only going to act out on that when they feel that sorrow, when they feel it burning on their skin, and they feel like they want to do something to make their circumstance better. That doesn't happen if you like have this vague memory of sorrow from like 20 years ago and use that to adjudicate your actions. Absolute rubbish, right? So why do we do like how do we compare then to opening opposition? Look, here's the thing. Opening opposition wanted to talk about like having better relationships and being able to empathize with people. We think that is fair, but ultimately, like we're not sure if that answers the question that closing government asked them as to why is that the burden that you want to place on individuals, right? Why is it that like individuals should be empathetic to people? So we think, as far as opening opposition case is concerned, we would be happy and are happy to accept that sorrow does in fact make people empathetic, make them more likely to do charity, make them more likely to fight for their community, right? But ultimately, when you're weighing up closing and opening, we will tell you that that the benefits that we provide to you on an individualistic level, the ability to make decisions going into the future when you're stuck in your midlife crisis, when like you feel like you're at a dead end, when you feel like you're at a dead end, you really want to do something new in your life, is something that was brought about to you uniquely in closing opposition, right? We were the ones who told you that sorrow is in fact something, the baseline for like a whole range of emotions to stem from, and ultimately those are the exact emotions that are going to make you to aspire to be better, to be like to perhaps aspire to start an NGO or a startup, or like just do something that makes your life more meaningful and like more happier, right? Ultimately there is a value judgment to be made in this debate. The other side that just wants to drug up people and just leave them be in the state that they are for perpetuity. We stand for change. Very, very proud of this.
Would you want to shake hands?
Correct.